Buckle up, everyone, because we are diving deep into the world of Chinese robotics today.
Sounds exciting.
It is, and get this, we've got something special lined up.
Oh,
Yeah, instead of the usual format, we're going to be like flies on the wall, listening in on a raw, unedited conversation.
I like it. What kind of conversation?
So it's between Michael Kessler, he's a robotics expert, and Alan, he's coming straight from a Chinese robotics company.
Wow, so we're getting like insider perspectives.
Exactly. It's a chance to hear what they're really thinking, without the PR polish.
So no marketing speak, just straight talk.
You got it, and
Yeah.
believe me, they don't hold back.
I bet. What kind of stuff do they touch on?
Well, they talk about how Chinese companies are shaking things up, the challenges they're facing, and what it all means for us, for the rest of the world.
Sounds fascinating. Let's jump in then.
All right, so they start off talking about this huge robotics boom that's been happening in China over the past 5 years.
Makes sense. I
Yeah.
mean, China's been making big moves in tech.
Right, and Alan, he's on the ground there. He says it's all about this surge in demand. Businesses are realizing they need to automate.
Yeah, to stay competitive, I'd imagine.
Exactly. And he says it's not just about replacing factory workers anymore. It's about robots doing more complex tasks.
So like higher level stuff, not just assembly lines.
Exactly. And he makes a really interesting point. He says it's not just about the robots themselves, it's about the people behind them.
Makes sense. You need the brains to build and program these things.
Right. So he's talking about these skilled entrepreneurs. They have a deep understanding of both hardware and algorithms.
So they're not just business people, they're techies too.
Right. That's what's making this boom so powerful. You have the demand, the tech, and these brilliant minds all coming together.
Now that's a recipe for disruption. I bet the competition's fierce.
Oh, absolutely. And Michael, he picks up on that. He asks Alan, what makes your company stand out from the crowd?
Good question, because there are tons of robotics companies popping up in China.
Right. And Alan's answer is pretty straightforward. He says it's all about cost management.
Okay. But not just cheap labor, right?
No, he's talking about being really strategic with resources, streamlining every aspect of their operations.
Like maximizing efficiency every step of the way.
Exactly. And he also reveals their secret weapon contract manufacturing.
Interesting. How does that help them?
So let them stay agile, they can adapt to market demands quickly, and scale up production without having to own every part of the process.
Ah, I see. So they're not bogged down by infrastructure.
Right, they can move fast, and that's a big advantage in a rapidly changing industry.
Definitely. Yeah, we can't talk about business in China without mentioning Guanxi, right?
That network of relationships, it's often seen as the key to success in China.
So what's Alan's take on it?
Well, Michael actually asks him directly, how important is Guanxi, especially when partnering with foreign companies?
I'm curious to hear this because you always hear about how crucial Guanxi is.
Right. But Alan's response might surprise you. He says it's not as all-powerful as people think, especially in tech hubs like Shenzhen.
Really? So like Silicon Valley in China.
Exactly. He explains that these cities have embraced a more meritocratic system. It's about talent and performance more than personal connections.
Interesting. So it's shifting away from that who you know mentality.
It seems, so he says even in established companies like Tencent, a strong Guanxi won't guarantee you success.
Wow. So it's more about what you can do than who you know.
Or their internal systems are designed to promote fairness and prevent favoritism.
That's a big cultural shift.
It is, and it signals that China is serious about creating a level playing field.
So this begs the question, how do Western companies navigate this new landscape?
That's exactly what Michael wants to know. He asks Alan about the challenges of forming partnerships between Western and Chinese companies.
Yeah, is it all about bridging a cultural divide, or is there more to it?
Well, Alan actually downplays the cultural differences. He says those aren't the biggest hurdle.
So what's more important then?
He emphasizes the importance of shared values and a deep understanding of each other's business models.
So finding common ground beyond cultural background.
Exactly. It's about aligning goals and principles.
Makes sense. But there's still practical hurdles, right? Like foreign companies used to need a Chinese partner to operate there.
That's true. But get this, Alan points out that foreign companies can now own 100% of their businesses in China.
Oh, wow. That's a huge change.
It signals a growing openness to foreign investment and collaboration.
So it's becoming easier for Western companies to get involved in the Chinese robotics scene.
It seems that way, but Alan still emphasizes the need for due diligence. Research potential partners thoroughly understand their track record.
Yeah, you can't just jump in blindly.
Exactly. It's about building trust and transparency from the beginning.
Now, what about the technical side of things? I imagine there are challenges there, too.
Absolutely. And Alan, he makes a bold statement. He believes China may already have solutions to some of the technical challenges facing robotics companies globally.
Interesting. What makes him think that?
He points to the sheer volume of component manufacturers in China. They have this vast ecosystem of suppliers and the ability to rapidly prototype and scale up production.
So they have a speed advantage.
Exactly. But Michael, he brings up a concern about lead times for certain components like actuators.
Oh, yeah, those can be tricky to get hold of.
He says he's heard it can take up to a year to get certain actuators.
That could definitely create bottlenecks.
Right, so even with China's manufacturing prowess, the global supply chain can be vulnerable.
Makes sense. And that vulnerability has been exposed in recent years.
Exactly. It's something to keep in mind when assessing the risks and opportunities in this industry.
Definitely. Now let's talk about intellectual property. That's always a hot topic.
Oh, it is. And Michael, being a big supporter of open source development, he argues that strict IP protection can actually stifle innovation.
Yeah, the idea is that freely sharing ideas accelerates progress for everyone.
Right, but Alan offers a more nuanced perspective.
I'm curious to hear his take on it.
He acknowledges the benefits of open source, but suggests a balanced approach.
So not completely open, but not completely closed either.
Right, he uses OpenAI and DeepSeek as contrasting examples.
Okay, I'm familiar with OpenAI, but what's DeepSeek?
They're a Chinese AI company, and they've been exploding in popularity.
Really? What are they known for?
Well, they've embraced an open source strategy, and their app is currently the #1 download in the US Apple Store.
Wow, that's impressive for a Chinese company to break through like that.
It is, so it's raising questions about whether this open source approach is sustainable in the long run.
It's a risky move giving away your competitive advantage like that.
It is, but it's also paying off in terms of market share.
It's a fascinating case study.
Yeah.
It's challenging the traditional thinking around IP.
Right, and it shows that China is not afraid to experiment and try new approaches.
Definitely, they're not just following the playbook, they're writing their own.
Exactly. And that brings us to the impact of the US-China trade war.
Yeah, that's been looming over everything.
It has, and both Michael and Alan, they see the trade war as pointless.
I think a lot of people share that sentiment.
They say it disrupts global supply chains, stifles growth, and creates uncertainty.
Not exactly a recipe for success.
Right, and Alan emphasizes the need to build trust and find mutually beneficial solutions.
Yeah, cooperation is key, especially in a globalized industry like robotics.
Exactly. He believes collaboration is the way forward.
Now, shifting gears a bit, Michael brings up electric vehicles.
Ah, yes, another area where China is making waves.
Big time, they're dominating the EV market.
They are, and Alan, he starts rattling off a list of prominent Chinese EV brands: BYD, Geely, Great Wall, the list goes on.
I can barely keep up with all the new players emerging from China.
Right. He even mentions that China has over 100 EV manufacturers.
Wow, that's mind-blowing compared to the handful we have in the West.
It is, and this intense competition is driving innovation at a breakneck pace.
I can only imagine what kind of breakthroughs are happening over there.
And Michael, he's clearly impressed by the advancements. He points out the inherent advantages of EVs. You know, the superior acceleration, the quiet ride.
It's not just about being eco-friendly anymore, it's about performance too.
Right, and China is at the forefront of this EV revolution.
So what's Alan's advice for robotics startups trying to make it in this competitive landscape?
Well, Michael asks them directly, and his response is pretty blunt. He says, prioritize survival above all else.
Oof, that's a harsh reality.
It is. He predicts a wave of acquisitions in the coming years.
So only the strong will survive.
It seems that way. He believes only a handful of companies will ultimately dominate the market.
It's a cutthroat industry for sure.
It is. So if you're thinking of investing in a robotics startup, be prepared for the long haul.
And what about Western companies looking to partner with Chinese suppliers? Any advice there?
That's another question Michael asks, and Alan recommends starting small, purchase samples, conduct due diligence.
Yeah, test the waters before diving in headfirst.
Exactly. And don't worry too much about language barriers. Michael shares a funny anecdote about his first trip to China back in 2008. He could barely get a taxi to his hotel because of the language barrier.
I can imagine that was frustrating.
It was, but today, thanks to advanced translation technology like iFlyTech and Google Translate communication, is becoming much easier.
That's great to hear technology breaking down barriers.
It is, so things are changing rapidly.
So what's Alan's final prediction for the future of robotics? What does he think companies need to focus on?
He believes user-friendliness will be key.
So making robots easy for anyone to use.
Exactly. He says companies need to shift their focus from purely technical advancements to creating robots that are intuitive and easy to use.
Like the iPhone of robots.
Exactly. He says ease of use will be a major differentiator in the market.
So it's not just about building cool tech anymore. It's about making that tech accessible to everyone.
Right. And that's where he sees the biggest opportunity for growth.
Well, this has been an incredible journey so far.
It has, and there's still so much more to unpack. Stay tuned as we continue our deep dive into this fascinating world.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
Wow, that was a lot to take in.
It was, but we've only just scratched the surface.
I'm ready for more.
All right, so before we jump back into Michael and Alan's conversation,
Okay.
I think it's worth taking a moment to process what we've heard so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that China's approach to robotics is fundamentally different.
Right, they're not just playing catch up, they're creating their own path.
And they're moving fast.
It's like they've created this robotics pressure cooker where innovation is happening at warp speed.
And it makes you wonder, right, what this means for the rest of the world. If China's going all in on robotics, what are the implications for everyone else?
It's a question we should all be asking ourselves.
Especially considering how automation is already changing the global workforce.
Right. If China is accelerating this trend, what does that mean for jobs, economies, societies?
It's not just about manufacturing jobs disappearing anymore. We're seeing robots enter all sorts of fields: healthcare, logistics, even customer service.
It's happening everywhere.
And China's advancements are only going to speed things up.
It can feel a bit overwhelming, to be honest. The pace of change is so rapid.
It is, but it's also an opportunity
To do what?
to rethink how we approach work, education, even our societal structures.
So it's not just a technological challenge, it's a societal one.
Exactly. We need to be proactive in preparing for a future where robots play a much bigger role.
So what can we learn from China's approach? Are there strategies we can apply to our own economies and workforces?
That's where our deep dive gets really interesting. By listening closely to Michael and Alan, we can glean those insights.
All right, let's get back to it.
Okay, so as the conversation continues, Michael brings up DeepSeek.
DeepSeek.
Yeah, it's a Chinese AI company that's been making headlines.
I haven't heard of them.
Well, they're kind of a big deal. Their app is currently the #1 download in the U.S. Apple Store.
Really? A Chinese company? That's impressive.
It is. And Michael, being a big advocate for open source development, he's particularly interested in their strategy.
What's their strategy?
They've embraced open source. They're making their technology freely available.
That's a bold move.
It is. And Michael asks Alan for his take on it.
So what does Alan think?
Well, he acknowledges that open source can be a powerful tool for growth.
Right.
But he also highlights the risks.
Like what?
Giving away your competitive advantage. Others can copy your code, build upon it, potentially surpass you.
So it's a gamble.
It is. And it's paying off for DeepSeek in the short term.
They're getting a ton of users.
Exactly. They've achieved a level of market penetration that would have been difficult with a traditional closed source approach.
But can they sustain it? Will this open source strategy come back to bite them?
It's hard to say, only time will tell.
It's a fascinating case study, though.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's challenging our assumptions about how to succeed in the tech world.
And it shows that China is not afraid to take risks.
They're definitely shaking things up.
Now, towards the end of the conversation, Michael asks Alan for some advice.
Oh, for who?
For Western companies looking to navigate the Chinese robotics market.
Makes sense. It's a complex landscape.
It is. And Alan's advice is pretty straightforward. He says, do your homework.
Don't just jump in blindly.
Right. Understand the market, the culture, the regulations.
It's about being prepared.
Exactly. And he also stresses the importance of finding the right partners.
Companies you can trust.
Right ones that share your values, understand your business model, and have a proven track record.
Solid advice.
And finally, he encourages Western companies to be adaptable.
To be open to new ways of doing things.
Right. The Chinese approach to robotics is unique, and there's a lot we can learn from them.
So this conversation has been a whirlwind tour of China's robotics revolution.
It has. We've seen the speed of innovation, the fierce competition, and the global implications.
We've also heard some really insightful perspectives from Alan.
He's given us a lot to think about.
He has. But there's one final point that Michael raises that I think perfectly captures the essence of this conversation.
What's that?
He says, and I quote, "We got to make these robots easier to use because people are lazy."
He's got a point.
He does. If we want robots to be truly transformative, we need to make them accessible to everyone.
Not just the tech savvy.
Exactly. It's about designing robots that are intuitive, user-friendly, seamlessly integrated into our daily lives.
It's about moving beyond the tech and focusing on the human experience.
How do people interact with robots? How can we make those interactions more natural, more enjoyable?
That's the key to unlocking the full potential of robotics.
And that brings us to the end of part 2.
But we're not done yet. We'll be right back for the final part of our deep dive. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Chinese robotics. It's been a wild ride so far.
It has. We've really gotten a glimpse behind the curtain, you know.
Yeah, and I think one of the most important takeaways for me
Yep.
was this idea that Alan talked about, about shifting the focus in robotics.
Yeah, away from purely engineering-driven approaches.
Exactly. He's saying we need to prioritize the user experience.
It's not enough to just build robots that are technically amazing.
Right, they need to be intuitive, easy to use.
Seamlessly integrated into people's lives.
Exactly. Like imagine a robot that can perform complex surgery,
Okay.
but it requires a team of engineers to operate it.
That's not very practical.
It's impressive, but its real-world applications would be limited.
And that's Alan's point. He believes this shift towards user-centric design is crucial for wider adoption.
Makes sense if robots are too complex or intimidating.
People just won't use them.
Right, they'll remain niche products for specialized industries.
But if we design robots with the average person in mind,
With the same level of user-friendliness as our smartphones,
then the possibilities are endless.
robots helping us in our homes,
Assisting with everyday tasks,
providing companionship.
even enhancing our abilities.
It's a pretty exciting vision.
It is both exciting and a little daunting.
But it all comes down to that one key element.
User-friendliness.
If people can't easily interact with robots, the whole revolution stalls.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of Chinese robotics.
It's been an incredible journey.
We've covered so much ground,
We've heard from experts
learned about the challenges and opportunities.
and explored the global implications of this technological wave.
But most importantly,
Yeah.
I hope we've sparked your curiosity
To learn more about robotics.
to think about the future.
And to ask yourself what role robotics will play in your own life.
Because the future is not predetermined.
We're shaping it right now with the choices we make.
So keep asking questions
Observe the world around you.
and be an active participant in shaping the future.
That's it for this deep dive into Chinese robotics.
Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of the world around us.